Despite women making up nearly half Nigeria's population, their representation in political offices remains significantly lower compared to men. In the National Assembly, for example, women hold only 6.4% of women in the National Assembly, and in the state houses of assembly is just about 4.4%. The underrepresentation of women highlights deep-rooted cultural norms, economic barriers, political violence, and limited educational opportunities that continue to hinder women from fully participating in politics. To address these issues, Nigeria is considering important changes to its electoral system. Proposed amendments include implementing quotas to ensure more women candidates are nominated, providing financial support to help women overcome economic challenges in running for office, strengthening laws to protect female politicians from violence, offering training programs to build the capacity of women aspiring for political roles, and conducting voter education campaigns to promote gender equality. These reforms are critical for creating a more inclusive democracy that reflects Nigeria's diverse population. I am Ezenwawagu, welcoming you to Electoral Reform Half Hour on the Nta News24 Abuja. This program is brought to you as always by Appearing Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa and is supported by the MacArthur Foundation. We're honored to have Cynthia Mbamalu. Cynthia Mbamalu is a human rights lawyer and co-founder of Yaga Africa and serves as director of programs. With over 16 years experience, she has championed political inclusion, electoral reform, and gender rights advocacy. She's also very prominent in co-founding the Not Too Young to Run and Run movement initiatives and leads the Watching the Vote project. Cynthia also engages in legislative reforms for gender-sensitive laws and hosts the very, very, very popular podcast on democracy and social development issues. It's my pleasure to welcome my sister, Cynthia Mbamalu. You are welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Looking fresh, coming from Edo.
I know, I think we've rested. Even you too. I'm like, is it the same face you had in Edo? You've rested.
I was going to start the program around Edo, but we decided, because that's not the focus of the electoral half hour on the NTA. But I'm going to ask you, did you think women fared well in the Edo 2024 elections?
Well, that's a big one. And if I look at it, maybe I'll start from different aspects. One, women as candidates, and I'll look at women as voters, and then women as electoral officials, so the INEC ad hoc officials. I think one of the places I would say women fared well when it came to women representation is women as election officials, because we saw at the polling units you had women, at least out of the 4, 2 were women, 4 ad hoc officials deployed. In most places, you have an average of 2 women out of the 4. And I think that's something to commend INEC on, because INEC is one institution that has a gender policy in Nigeria. If you think about most of the state institutions, and consistently, if there's one place they've remained faithful to that policy, is election administration. You'd always see that implementation of having women manage elections at the polls. Beyond that, when you talk of women as candidates, sadly we had just 1 female candidate, and I'm sure most people did not even know the female candidate. She's
of the PRP.
Yeah, PRP, yes, Patience Key. She ran for the office of the governor in Edo State. Yeah, obviously the campaigns, the process, and she wasn't one of the popular parties, or she wasn't from one of the popular parties contesting the elections. You know, for elections as big as governorship elections, the platform upon which you contest is also important beyond just your name and your personality and your manifesto. And so that, I would say that was really poor. We had some female deputy governorship candidates that were women, but the parties, it was still very poor. And so if you think about women as candidates, I'll say it was really poor representation of women. So on that aspect, I wouldn't say we did well. Both the Nigerian electoral or political system and even the at the candidates level. But if you look at women as voters, now I would wait for INEC's data, because usually INEC disaggregates its data on voter turnout. That is the only way you can ascertain if the women registered actually came out to vote. And so until INEC cleans up his data and provides that information, we can't say much. However, I think at places I went to, I saw women at the polls. In fact, there was one location, it was raining. You know, it rained on elections day.
Absolutely.
They were, this group of women, they came with their umbrellas, and in fact, I'll say the men were now in their umbrella. I'm like, well, actually, it's a woman that would think of, let me carry umbrella, it may rain. And so it was like they were providing shelter as they queued. And I think that was quite commendable. So in all, candidates is the major place where you need representation, and we're not having that.
When we were thinking about this program, Cynthia, I was, in my mind, I was looking at, I put Cynthia in the box for the program. I was saying who will better, who will give me a better conversation around, because of the level of work that you have done in this area. What do you think are those issues that hinder women, electoral participation, especially for high positions?
Well, I think the first is the way the system is set up. We have a structure within our political system that is largely driven by patriarchal norms. And that is because, one, historically, if you look at our journey to democracy, transition to democracy, when the parties emerged again to start to contest for office, it was a highly male-dominated space. And so you already had leadership of parties were male-dominated across board. And so when you have a system that is male-dominated, it also makes it difficult for women to influence things like manifestos or things like party guidelines for primaries and all of that. And so decision-making at the party level was male-dominated. In that way, the sensitivities that affect or keep women out were not put into the policy-making at party levels. Most of the parties have transited, and we now, like APC wasn't there in 1999, but APC emerged. It was a merger of different parties. So a form of, I can say partly, a part of it was here from 1999, but even at that formation level, it was also done. So if I think of one structural issue, is the fact that the way parties are set up is still male dominated, so the policies are not really gender sensitive to create spaces. The other is just the societal issues, and that's both cultural and religious. I remember in 2019 we were engaging with some young women in the north, in Sokoto and Kano, who went to run for the House of Representatives and the State Assembly. And then they shared some of their complaints that when they went for the campaigns, one of the things they were told was women are not meant to lead based on principles in the Quran. That was what they were told. And so they were told point blank, we will not vote for you, you cannot be a leader. And then I remember one of them said, she then told them that, I'm actually not running for governor, I'm running for legislative house. I know legislators are representatives, so I'm going to represent you, not to lead you. And so it started getting this, they had the argument, and then some of them started saying, okay, if you're going as a representative, perhaps you can see that. But the fact that religion is still a factor that informs how people make decisions is a major limiting factor. And then culture, historically, there's that perception that when it comes to political power, it's men. And so the few women that come into this space, some of them deal with challenges that their male counterpart wouldn't necessarily deal with. And I think the last one is the money factor, because money is...
Yeah, you're going to come to that. I just hope that we could use religion and culture in the service of good and not this limiting stuff that you talk about. And then I'm looking at the recent Edo elections. You did mention that the PRP candidate, a female 5 deputy... how do we reverse this trend? What can we do to change this perception in few minutes?
I think honestly we need laws, legislative process, legislative quotas, where we have a law that clearly provides for quotas for women. We need to also have amendments to our constitution, because countries that have increased women participation in government had to amend their laws. Sierra Leone, for instance, recently, the last election last year, women representation in the parliament increased to 29.5%. And that was because they passed a gender and equality law before the elections, which made mandates on political parties to ensure women are part of the system. Before then, women representation in Sierra Leone was barely 12%. But with a law within one electoral circle, you could see it move from 12% to 29.5%. Nigeria, sadly, we're still dealing with actually under 5%, because they were, after elections, they were court cases, and some people lost their seats. You know how it happens. So now it's less than 5% representation of women, and that's because we have no law. And I think for me, the best way to achieve that is we need a law, a gender quota law, whatever we want to call it. We need that law to exist.
But it's faced resistance. Those bills have faced significant resistance in the National Assembly. Whether elective or appointive, what can be done? I know I've had this conversation with you over and over, but what do we need to do to push the needle, a bit different? And just do that in a short before we go on a
now, I believe we need a lot of male voices to join the advocacy. Why do I say so? Because in a patriarchal society, it's easier for men to listen to men. And so we need more men on board to help us in pushing this agenda.
But don't you think that a movement is also important? You were significant, very central in the Not Too Young to Run. Why is it difficult to revisit all the strategies that were employed to push the Not Too Young?
Because there are different dynamics. People are more receptive to youth issues than gender issues. And so while we have a movement that exists...
Okay, just hold your thoughts. Okay. We'll go on a short break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversations with Cynthia Mbamalu. Stay with us. Okay, welcome back from the break. We're still talking with Cynthia Mbamalu, Director of Programs, Yaga Africa. One of these, you were before we went on break, you were sharing thoughts around those. Can you conclude those thoughts?
Yes. I was talking about building movements. That is important. We have that movement, actually a movement that is intergenerational, but also across both sexes. And why do I say so? Consistently, what we've had is more like a women's movement. So you have a lot more women speaking on these issues. But I do believe that what is missing, or what we can do to amplify the voices, is to have more male champions, because our National Assembly is still male dominated, and that's where the laws are made. And if you know the way it is, you know how you are. Your fellow men will easily listen to a man than a woman. And so if we have more men in National Assembly speaking and pushing these bills, I think it would give it better opportunities.
Was that what Mexico and Sweden did, and Rwanda? You've been to Rwanda, I know.
Yes.
So what do you think
for
are the
success
stories for those countries?
For those countries, actually, they had the presidents behind it. Even Senegal, that passed the gender bill, Sierra Leone. And that's one of the things that we've seen, that in countries where the system is a bit difficult, when you have a president, when it comes as an executive bill, it's usually easily accepted, because you know how the system is. Most times the president is from a ruling party, and the ruling party has more seats in the parliament. And so we've seen that one of the entry points is we had, or some of those countries, what they did, they had a male voice coming most likely from the most powerful seat, which is the office of the president, pushing it. Some other countries, it took camping in front of the parliament or National Assembly, as our case, day and night. I know in Zimbabwe, when we were amending the constitution, I was talking with one of the co-chairs of the Constitution Review Committee, and he was explaining that what happened was the women basically locked down where they were having the meeting and said, if you do not make this amendment, you're not coming, you're not leaving, you're not going home, until they had that pushed into their constitution. ANC in South Africa, so South Africa, what they have is parties have quotas for women, and ANC has a 50-50 quota. And I was having a conversation with top leaders of the ANC, and one of the examples they gave, he said, when the party was formed, Winnie Mandela led the movement and said ANC, the meeting, they would not proceed on issues around who runs for president and all of that until they address the women issue, and that ANC must adopt a gender quota 50-50. And he was explaining, because he was in the room, he was giving us real life experience. That was what happened, which is why till date, because ANC has been the ruling party, it has a 50-50 quota, so its candidates list, it must have 50% men, 50% women.
You've had conversations with top ANC leaders. You've had conversations with people in Zimbabwe. Why is it difficult for you to talk with top leaders in top political parties?
Interestingly, I have. So I've been doing some interviews recently with some lawmakers, trying to understand why the gender bills failed in the last assembly. And interestingly, I wanted to speak especially with lawmakers from the Northwest, North Central, and some from the South. I needed the voices from the Northwest also, because you look at representation, they have larger number of seats in the House of Representatives. Some of the things they had identified was, one, yes, they need more men, because they said first, when it was, if a bill is coming pushed by one of the lawmakers and it's like, oh, it's only this woman pushing it, it's going to take a while for people to understand that. But if from the beginning, initial stage, there's that lobbying that gets a lot of men to their buy-in on the bill, that can be helpful. That was one. The second, they also talked about understanding the power dynamics in the National Assembly, and that is important. We start identifying who are those champions. You know, there are some people that when they speak, the cohort they coordinate follows. And so we need to start doing that power mapping in the National Assembly, because there are some important voices that once they speak on your matter, it gets the attention of the leadership of the Assembly, both at the Senate and the House of Reps. And so at this moment, we're doing a lot of research, just trying to, if I meet any lawmaker now, I ask them question, what do you think about this bill? There were some bills they had a major pushback over, because they said, well, this particular, like the Create Additional Seats bill, there's a lot of politics around it. Because they also talk about the political implication of those legislations. But we'll keep talking with them and learning.
I want to take you away from gender bills and all of that. There are all sorts of reforms slated for changes and amendments in the National Assembly.
Yes.
Early voting, diaspora voting, elections, all elections in one day.
Yeah.
Is this something you can help us unpack? Where do you stand on that? What do you think should be? There are people who are also talking about people in correctional centers being allowed to vote. And I know you've traveled extensively. Are there best practices? Are there things that we think we can adopt?
I'll talk on the early voting, because I think it's important. Almost every system, even within West Africa, is adopting it. Countries less developed than we are. And early voting, basically, there's a bill, it has passed first reading in National Assembly, sponsored by Senator Yaradua, and the bill basically is to provide, the Electoral to provide for voting for election day workers, so INEC officials, ad hoc officials, observers, media, security personnel. A lot of these people who make up thousands of personnel do not vote on elections day because they are on a duty. I know in Nigeria you have to vote where you register. So that is the bill. I'm in full support of this because I've seen it work. In South Africa recently, they have early voting done 3 days to the elections, but you have to indicate. So there are procedures for that, and the bill clearly highlights those procedures, and we're pushing for that. The diaspora voting, diaspora voting is a bit tricky, but I also believe that at this point you can explore that, because we've seen countries doing that. I know recently Algeria had an elections, and it was showing how the Algerians in diaspora were voting a week to the elections. And we've seen other countries implement it. I'm trying to remember which one was most recent, but that's the most recent one. I think it's important we consider that, because there are lots of Nigerians living in diaspora and they contribute to the economy in the country one way or the other. The conversations you raised on the voting on one day, now, as long as it's national elections, because there's that thing about make local government elections conducted, but that's a different issue. I believe that that is a separate issue, and local government elections should still remain with the State Independent Electoral Commission. But for the National Assemblies, President, Governorship, House of Assembly, I don't see anything wrong if we still want to conduct it in one day, because we've seen countries where they have 5 ballot boxes on the same day, and that is because we are seeing the politics of the timeline in the election, the difference in dates of the elections. Most times, once you have the presidential and the National Assembly, it either heats up the policy for the governorship, or it changes how voters vote in a governorship. And I think for resource management, for increase in turnout especially, that is important we actually have it in one day. And let me talk about this turnout part. Data has shown consistently that you even have higher turnout for the presidential and National Assembly, but governorship and state assemblies is lower turnout. And so if we really want to push this turnout thing, perhaps we should have all elections on one day. It just means you need more personnel on that day to manage the process. No, not even more personnel in the sense.
What about the logistics nightmare?
The logistics will mean you have to plan earlier. That's all. Because the major thing that will change is the production of ballot papers. Because now you're going to have more ballot papers and more than 3 ballot boxes on that day. So you have like 5 ballot boxes. Okay,
we're going on a home stretch. Share your final thoughts in just 1.5 minutes. Let's see where mentorship, there are issues about female politicians. How do they drag in people like you, young people coming to the fold?
I believe that we need a lot of investment in capacity building and mentorship opportunities for women, especially younger women who want to contest across board. But lastly, please, it's important we understand that women need to be part of the decision-making process in Nigeria.
This is where we draw the curtain on this episode of Electoral Reform Half Hour, and we wish to specially thank Cynthia Mbamalu, lawyer, Director of Programs for Yaga Africa, for your time and contributions on this program. It was a pleasure having you on the Electoral Reform Half Hour. Is brought to you by Peering Advocacy and Advancement Center in Africa with sponsorship from MacArthur Foundation. We are live every Saturday from 8:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. with a repeat broadcast every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. on same station. You can contact us on our social media handles showing on your TV screen. Thank you for watching. I am Ezenwawagu. Have a good time.